Welcome to the first ever 8K TV shootout on this channel. Film in 4K. Hello everyone, Vincent Teo from HDTV Test here. On your left is the Samsung Q950TS, the South Korean brand's flagship QLED for 2020. On your right is the Sony ZH8, also known as the Bravia Z8H in the USA. Both use an 8K LCD panel with a native resolution of 7680x4320 and share the same screen size of 75 inches, so you can judge upscaling and motion performance on a level playing field. Both TVs have been calibrated to the same standards used within the film and broadcast industry. For SDR, that's D65 white point, BT1886 gamma, and Rec 709 colors. For HDR, it's the same D65 white point, but ST2084 PQ EOTF and DCI-P3 color space within Rec 2020 container. Both these TVs use VA-type LCD panels with viewing angle compensation film, but colors and contrast would still degrade off-axis, however slightly. Because of this, not to mention my camera's limited dynamic range and YouTube's compression, what you're seeing in this video won't fully represent what I'm seeing in person. So please do not make any judgment on picture quality directly from this video alone. Also, the key light I'm using to light up my face is causing some rainbow reflections on the top left corner on the Sony ZH8. These TVs are just too big, and my studio is too small for me to place the key light far enough not to cause any reflections on screen. This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. With more and more people staying home these days, Netflix is continuing to cap the bitrate of certain shows, especially in Europe, which will cause the picture to look softer with more compression artifacts such as macro blocking, pixelation, and noise in dark scenes. What if there's a way to access Netflix servers in another country where streaming bitrate is not capped? This is where a VPN comes in. Surfshark allows you to stream content from another country without needing you to be physically there, so you can watch Netflix in higher bitrates and better picture quality. You can also get more content that's not available in your region, perhaps the US Netflix library, which contains more movie titles. For less than the price of a Big Mac per month, you can use Surfshark on as many devices as you want in your household, all at the same time. There's 24/7 live customer support, a 30-day money-back guarantee, and even instructions on how to set up the VPN on your LG or Samsung Smart TV. And for a limited time only, if you use promo code HDTV Test, you'll get 83% off and 3 extra months free. So sign up today and give Surfshark a try. I'll put the link in the YouTube description below. Thanks again for your support. Befitting top-tier LED LCDs, both the Samsung Q950TS and the Sony ZH8 feature full array local dimming or FALD LED backlighting. So let's kick off this comparison with the number of local dimming zones. The Samsung Q950TS has 480 independently dimmable zones in a 30x16 grid, while the Sony ZH8 has 320 zones in a 16x20 arrangement. Samsung's local dimming couldn't be switched off from the user menu, so we had to use our own dimming defeater test pattern. After aligning peak white to 120 candelas per square meter, native black level on the Samsung Q950TS measured 0.1 candelas per square meter, whereas the Sony ZH8's native black level, under the same conditions, was deeper at 0.058 candelas per square meter. Samsung's local dimming algorithm suppressed blooming better than the Sony ZH8 or Z8H, which would exhibit more light leakage into the letterbox bars from adjacent bright objects. However, Samsung's overwhelming desire to suppress blooming and keep blacks as deep as possible isn't without its own side effects, causing small bright objects to look dimmer, as well as a vignetting effect along the circumference of this rapidly expanding white circle. In this scene from Gravity, as Sandra Bullock is hurtling through space, the Q950TS' more aggressive local dimming algorithm led to crushed shadow detail and noticeable luminance fluctuations compared with the Sony ZH8. We see a similar result in this campfire scene from The Revenant, with the Samsung Q950TS exhibiting less blooming around the subtitles. But the white text appeared dimmer. Shadow detail looked less distinct, and as the camera zoomed in, there's more backlight instability on the Q950TS. There's no major difference in SDR color accuracy between these two TVs after calibration, though because the Samsung Q950TS more aggressive local dimming tended to darken near black gamma, there's a touch more pop at the expense of accurate tracking. Samsung's HDR color mapping would occasionally introduce polarization around bright objects on the Q950TS, which could be eradicated by setting color space to native that utilized the TV's native color gamut, but was also more inaccurate. Baseline motion clarity on the Samsung Q950TS was clearer than on the Sony ZH8. Here, we are displaying a 1080p 120Hz footage from the Meridio 7G signal generator. Note that Samsung's motion settings would be unavailable for 120Hz video signal, whereas Sony's would be available, but only clearness black frame insertion would have any effect. With all motion settings off, the letters on the moving truck would look blurrier on the Sony ZH8, probably because the television uses PFS phosphor, which has longer decay times than quantum dot. Engaging clearness black frame insertion on the Sony ZH8 would improve its motion clarity, but the image would also look darker. 120Hz content is still very rare for most consumers, so let's come back down to plain old 60Hz. Enabling picture clarity was sufficient to achieve 1080 lines of motion resolution on the Samsung Q950TS, but the Bravia ZH8 needed the help of backlight scanning on top of motion interpolation to achieve 1080 lines. Although thankfully, owing to Sony's X-Motion Clarity black zonal insertion technology, there wasn't visible flicker or excessive brightness drop that couldn't be compensated by the TV's formidable light output. Nevertheless, with optimal motion settings on both televisions, the Samsung Q950TS still looked clearer than the Sony ZH8 in many 60Hz content we watched. We suspect the advantage is conferred by quantum dot's faster response time. Samsung's motion interpolation could be adjusted to target only 50Hz or 60Hz content, so 24Hz movie wouldn't be affected by soap opera effect or SOE, whereas Sony's motion interpolation would introduce some SOE to 24p content, however slight. That said, the motion interpolation on the Samsung Q950TS had serious problems with 50Hz content, incurring frequent frame drops in many 50Hz programs we watched, so much so that we decided just to turn off picture clarity when watching terrestrial broadcast TV. With all motion interpolation disabled, both TVs presented 24 frames per second smoothly without any sign of telecinic judder. With 8K content so thin on the ground, upscaling is a key battleground for these 8K TVs. Without many 8K TV owners would be watching standard definition content, but on this SMPTE RP133 test card in 576i, the Sony ZH8 looked cleaner but a bit softer, while the Samsung Q950TS was more aggressive in its sharpening, leading to more junk pixels and fizziness. However, on this off-air broadcast captured from ITV SD, the Sony ZH8 extracted a bit more sharpness from the grass on the lawn, as well as the sweater on the gentleman. Going one step up to 1080p Blu-rays, the Samsung Q950TS managed to etch out slightly more detail from Daniel Craig's face than the Sony ZH8. Depending on what we watched, sometimes Sony's upscaling would look more detailed, other times Samsung's would look sharper, so let's call it a tie. When it came to video-based deinterlacing, the Samsung Q950TS had better jagged suppression than the Sony ZH8, smoothing out jagged edges more effectively not only on this 1080i Spears and Munsell test pattern from the excellent Meridio 7G signal generator, but also in real-world viewing of terrestrial broadcast programs. 1080p Chroma Bandwidth was another category that went to Samsung. The Q950TS resolved full Chroma Bandwidth from this 1080p test pattern from the Spears and Munsell HD benchmark disc natively in all picture presets except movie mode, whereas the Sony ZH8 or Z8H could only do so in graphics and game modes. Up close, we're talking less than 5 inches away from the screen. the Samsung Q950TS used heavier subpixel rendering, while the Sony ZH8 looked slightly blurrier to soften the pixel rasterization effect from the viewing angle compensation film. Whether these video processing techniques still preserve true 8K resolution is up for debate, but at least they are not visible from 5 inches away, let alone from a normal viewing distance. Up next, screen uniformity, and this is where the Samsung Q950TS fell down hard. Our review sample exhibited noticeable vertical bending, dirty screen effect, and even visible FALD grids on full-field gray slides, probably because of trying to cram a 480-zone full array dimming, a powerful backlight, and even the object tracking Sound Plus speaker system into such a slim chassis. Beside the Q950TS, our Sony ZH8 review unit looked impressively clean, with only mildly darkened corners which totally didn't bother us in real-world viewing. For HDR, peak brightness measured significantly brighter on the Sony ZH8, coming in at 2100 nits on the 10% window and 770 nits full field after calibration to D65 white point. In comparison, the Samsung Q950TS was dimmer, with a peak brightness of 1500 nits on the 10% window and 375 nits full field after calibration. This brightness difference was reflected in real-world HDR material too. For example, in this scene from The Lion King, where the clouds in the sky just look more impactful and realistic, with more highlight detail on the Sony ZH8 or Z8H. However, Samsung has implemented undefeatable dynamic tone mapping on the Q950TS, which would boost the overall brightness in certain HDR scenes to give the illusion that the television is brighter than it actually is. Here, I'm displaying a skin tone test scene from Stacey Spears, which will be included in the upcoming Spears & Munsell Ultra HD benchmark disc. On the Sony ZH8, almost every contrast-related setting was the default in the most accurate custom picture preset, whereas on the Q950TS, we had to lower the contrast value to track the ST2084 PQ standard more accurately on test patterns, and left local dimming at high, since local dimming standard brightened the picture even more, and local dimming low was clearly too dark. According to Stacey, the lower left white patch on the color checker chart should measure around 132 nits in PQ terms, which is of course absolute. As you can hopefully see from the picture-in-picture window, the ZH8 returned a figure of 130 nits, while the Q950TS measured brighter at 170 nits, suggesting that the TV was using dynamic tone mapping to make the picture look brighter than reference. While this approach can make some scenes pop more, for example this dark sequence, again from The Lion King, ultimately it is subverting the original artistic intent. Furthermore, brightening the picture is not without its own downsides. In this sequence from The Greatest Showman, the brightening of Jenny Lin's skin on the Q950TS actually caused the crystal embroidery on her silk gown to pop less than on the ZH8, diluting the HDR effect. In this scene from Kingsman, the sun appeared more blown out on the Q950TS due to the undefeatable dynamic tone mapping, and if we paused the movie a good few seconds later, we started to lose the definition between her nose and her sunlit cheek, since the picture was artificially brightened by the dynamic tone mapping. When not distorted by dynamic tone mapping, the Samsung Q950TS retained more specular highlight detail in 4000 nit content, while the ZH8 was following Sony's tone mapping philosophy to prioritize preserving average picture level at the expense of some bright highlight detail. Otherwise, gradation was generally smoother on the Sony ZH8, with or without the help of the company's smooth gradation decontouring filter. The Sony ZH8 supports Dolby Vision, whereas the Samsung Q950TS doesn't. But because Sony's Dolby Vision is player-led, the ZH8 would exhibit some near-black polarization in certain Netflix programs, which coincidentally also exposed the lower native contrast on the Q950TS. The internal YouTube app on the Samsung Q950TS supports 8K or 4320p resolution, while the YouTube app on the Sony ZH8 could only go up to 4K or 2160p resolution. but this YouTube footage filmed in 8K from Florian Friedrich, displayed in 8K on the Q950TS and only in 4K on the ZH8, perfectly drove home the point that resolution plays second fiddle to other more important attributes of picture quality. Even though the Sony ZH8 couldn't resolve 8K resolution according to this single-pixel horizontal griddle pattern designed by Stacy Spears, its superior screen uniformity, peak brightness, contrast, and highlight detail preservation were plainly visible from 10 feet away. For gaming, input lag measured 22 milliseconds in game mode on the Sony ZH8 and half the latency at 10 milliseconds on the Samsung Q950TS. However, the Q950TS had to sacrifice a lot of picture processing to achieve such low input lag, so its local dimming was noticeably less effective in game mode compared with that on the ZH8. Just like all my previous videos demonstrating Samsung's local dimming in game mode, I made sure to set dynamic black equalizer to 0 to obtain the deepest blacks. In Horizon Zero Dawn, the Samsung Q950TS looked grayer and more washed out in dark scenes, and couldn't render specular highlights in as bright and detailed a manner as the Sony ZH8. And although this SDR space sequence from Star Wars Episode 2 isn't a game, it's a great illustration of how local dimming was almost non-existent in game mode on the Samsung Q950TS compared to the Sony ZH8 or Z8H, which could still generate deep blacks and satisfying contrast in game mode. Using the excellent Meridio 7G signal generator to read the EDIT, both the Samsung Q950TS and the Sony ZH8 provided an HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 40 gigabits per second on HDMI port 4. Importantly for gamers, the Samsung Q950TS supports auto low latency mode and variable refresh rate, whereas the Sony ZH8 doesn't. For bright room usage, the anti-glare filter on the Samsung Q950TS attenuated reflections better, but the Sony ZH8 could get brighter to overcome even very strong ambient lighting. Both TVs exhibited rainbow reflections depending on how light hit the screen. Okay, it's time to wrap up this comparison video, and if you have been paying attention, you'll probably know by now that this picture quality contest was so one-sided that the winner doesn't need to be spelled out now. Yes? The key category where the Samsung Q950TS had a sizable advantage over the Sony ZH8 is in gaming, offering a lower input lag as well as ALLM and VRR that the ZH8 lacks. But if you really want ALLM and VRR to pair up with the upcoming Xbox Series X or Sony PS5, the Samsung Q95T or Q90T 4K QLEDs actually deliver better picture quality than the Q950TS, assuming you're not keen on OLED due to the risk of burn-in. And when you consider that the Sony ZH8 cost at least £2,000 less than the Samsung Q950TS, it's undoubtedly the better pick between these two 8K TVs. If you found this video useful, please click the like button and subscribe to the HDTV Test YouTube channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.